Montana Territory, 1885. Meredith Harrison's white wedding dress had collected 3 days of dust from passing trains, her eyes strained from watching the empty horizon where her groom should have appeared. She sat on her trunk, a forlorn figure against the weathered planks of the Sweetwater Station platform, her dreams fading with each sunset that painted the vast prairie gold. The station master approached with a tin cup of water, his weathered face creased with concern. "Miss Harrison, no lady should wait this long. Whatever gentleman promised to meet you here ain't coming." Meredith accepted the cup with gloved hands that once held such certainty. At 22, she had left everything behind in Boston. Her teaching position, her widowed mother's disapproval, the comfort of the familiar, all for Edwin's letters promising love and prosperity on his cattle ranch. 3 days is quite enough time to allow for delays, Mr. Peterson, she admitted, her voice maintaining the proper Eastern dignity despite her circumstances. "But I cannot simply disappear. I have nowhere to go." The afternoon train whistle sounded in the distance as she smoothed her once pristine gown, now travel-worn and spotted with coal dust. The modest lace collar that had seemed so fashionable when she departed Boston now felt like a relic from another life. "Train's coming from Cheyenne," Peterson said, glancing at his pocket watch. "Last one today? You might consider taking it back east. Town ain't no place for a lady alone." Meredith shook her head, her auburn hair coming loose from its careful arrangement. "I spent everything I had to come here. There's no going back." As the train approached with its thunderous rhythm, she stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. That was when she noticed the rider approaching from the west, a lone horseman moving at a steady gallop across the golden prairie. The train pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and screech of brakes, but Meredith's attention remained fixed on the approaching rider. The horseman drew closer, revealing a young man seated confidently in the saddle of a chestnut quarter horse. He reined in before reaching the platform, dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. Removing his hat, he revealed thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face was youthful, yet weathered by sun and wind, clean-shaven save for the faintest shadow of stubble along his strong jawline. He couldn't have been more than 25. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful nod, his blue eyes taking in her wedding dress with evident surprise. "Jacob Keller. I understand there might be a lady in need of assistance." The train conductor called, "All aboard," behind her, but Meredith barely heard him. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. A shadow crossed his face. Word travels fast in these parts. Especially bad news. He hesitated. "I heard about Edwin Prescott." Her heart dropped. "What about Edwin?" Jacob Keller's expression grew solemn as the train whistle blew its final warning. "Ma'am, I think we should talk. But first, are you getting on that train?" Meredith looked from Jacob to the departing train, then down at her trunk containing everything she owned in the world. 3 days of waiting had taught her that some promises were empty. Yet something in this stranger's direct gaze told her he wasn't offering false hope. "No," she said as the train pulled away. "I'm not." The ride to town was silent, with Meredith seated awkwardly sideways on Jacob's horse, her wedding dress bunched around her knees. Her trunk followed behind them on a hastily borrowed wagon driven by the stationmaster's boy. Each hoofbeat carried her further from the tracks where her dreams had died, toward an uncertain future in a town she'd never seen. When they crested the hill overlooking Sweetwater, the setting sun gilded the modest collection of wooden buildings. It was smaller than Edwin had described in his letters, just a main street with a few cross streets, nothing like the thriving cattle town he had promised. "It ain't much," Jacob said, seeming to read her thoughts. "But folks here look after their own." "I'm not one of their own," Meredith replied softly. "You are now," he said with quiet certainty. "Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house has a room. She takes in respectable women." As they rode down the main street, Meredith felt the weight of curious stares from shopkeepers and townspeople. A woman in a wedding dress riding double with a young cowboy was clearly the most interesting sight Sweetwater had witnessed in some time. "You still haven't told me what happened to Edwin," she said. Jacob's shoulders tensed beneath his worn denim jacket. "After we get you settled, Miss Harrison, some things shouldn't be discussed on horseback." The boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with lace curtains and a small front garden. an oasis of civilization in the frontier town. Mrs. Sullivan, a stout widow with kind eyes, took one look at Meredith's wedding dress and ushered her inside without a single prying question. "The poor lamb," she murmured to Jacob. "Prescott's bride, I take it." He nodded, keeping his voice low. "She doesn't know yet." Mrs. Sullivan's face tightened with disapproval. "Then you'd best tell her properly, Jacob Keller, not leave her wondering. The girls come 1,000 miles on nothing but promises." An hour later, freshly washed and changed into a simple blue day dress from her trunk, Meredith sat across from Jacob in Mrs. Sullivan's small parlor. The landlady had tactfully disappeared after serving them tea. "Edwin Prescott is dead, isn't he?" Meredith said directly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jacob looked up, startled by her directness. "Yes, ma'am. 3 weeks ago. Caught in a flash flood while checking fence lines on the north pasture." The news should have devastated her, yet Meredith felt an odd numbness. The man she'd agreed to marry had been a collection of elegant phrases and letters, not a flesh-and-blood person she'd ever touched or kissed. "Why didn't anyone send word?" she asked. Jacob's expression darkened. "That's where things get complicated. Prescott wasn't exactly forthcoming about his arrangements." "Meaning me," Meredith said flatly. "Yes, ma'am. Nobody knew he had a bride coming until the stationmaster found your last letter in Prescott's post office box. By then, you were already on your way." Meredith stared into her teacup, watching the amber liquid tremble with her slight movement. "I see. So I traveled across the country to marry a man who told no one about me, and now I'm stranded here with nothing." Jacob set down his cup with careful precision. "Not nothing, Miss Harrison. You have options." The way he said it made her look up sharply. "What kind of options does a woman alone have in a place like this, Mr. Keller?" His face flushed slightly, but his gaze remained steady. "Honest ones. Sweetwater needs a schoolteacher. The previous one left to get married last spring. Children are learning from whoever has time to teach them." Hope flickered tentatively in Meredith's chest. "I was a teacher in Boston." "I know," Jacob said, then quickly added, "The stationmaster mentioned it." Something in his quick correction made Meredith wonder what else Jacob Keller knew about her. Before she could question him, the grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times. "I should go," he said, rising. "You've had enough shocks for one day." At the parlor door, he turned back, hat in hand. "There's something else you should know, Miss Harrison. Prescott's ranch, it wasn't much. Just a small homestead with a few head of cattle. He wasn't the prosperous rancher he likely claimed to be." The last illusion shattered. Edwin's letters had painted pictures of a substantial operation, a comfortable home waiting for his bride. More lies. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Keller," she said quietly. "It seems to be in short supply where I'm concerned." He nodded, settling his hat on his head. "I'll come by tomorrow. There's a town meeting where they'll be discussing the school situation. Might be good for you to be there." After he left, Meredith stood by the window watching his tall figure move down the darkening street. Who was this cowboy who had appeared just as her last hope was departing? And why did she feel he knew more about her situation than he was telling? The town hall was filled to capacity the next evening. Meredith sat stiffly in the front row beside Mrs. Sullivan, conscious of the whispers and glances directed her way. Her gray traveling suit, the most modest outfit in her trunk, felt inadequate armor against such scrutiny. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Sullivan whispered. "They're just curious. We don't get many Eastern ladies in Sweetwater." The meeting was called to order by Mayor Hargrove, a portly man with impressive whiskers. After discussing various town matters, he finally addressed the school situation. "As you all know, we've been without a proper teacher since Miss Jenkins left us. The children are falling behind. We've advertised in Denver and Cheyenne, but no qualified applicants have come forward." Jacob Keller stood up from his seat near the back. "Mr. Mayor, I believe we have a solution right here in Sweetwater." Miss Harrison was a teacher in Boston. All eyes turned to Meredith. The mayor peered at her over his spectacles. "Is that so, young lady? Do you have any credentials?" Meredith rose, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "I taught at the Beacon Street Girls Academy for 3 years, sir. I'm certified in mathematics, literature, and natural philosophy." An impressed murmur ran through the crowd. "Natural philosophy?" someone called out. "What's that good for out here?" "It means she can teach your children why the crops fail when you plant them wrong, George Winters." Mrs. Sullivan shot back, causing scattered laughter. The mayor cleared his throat. The position pays $30 a month, with room and board at the schoolhouse. Term starts in 2 weeks. It was less than half what she'd earned in Boston, but it was independence, something Meredith hadn't dared hope for after being stranded. "I would be honored to accept the position," she said. As the meeting adjourned, townspeople came forward to introduce themselves. Mothers told her about their children, merchants offered credit at their stores until her first pay came, and the town carpenter promised to fix up the schoolhouse apartment. Through it all, Jacob Keller remained in the background, observing with quiet satisfaction. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached. "Seems like you're becoming one of Sweetwater's own already," he said. "Thanks to you," Meredith replied. "Why did you help me, Mr. Keller?" "You don't know me." His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "Maybe I'd like to." Before she could respond, Mayor Hargrove interrupted. "Miss Harrison, I nearly forgot. There's the matter of Prescott's effects." Meredith blinked in confusion. "His effects?" "Yes, as his intended bride. The law gives you some claim to his property. It's not much. The homestead's mortgaged to the bank, and most of the cattle were sold to cover debts. But there's some personal items, and about 80 acres of land that's free and clear." She hadn't considered this possibility. "I couldn't possibly claim. It's rightfully yours," Jacob cut in. "Prescott brought you out here on false pretenses. Least you deserve is something to start over with." The mayor nodded. "The bank would likely sell you the remaining property at a fair price if you're interested. It's good grazing land." "I know nothing about ranching," Meredith said, overwhelmed. Jacob's expression was unreadable. "Land is never a bad investment in these parts, Miss Harrison. Something to consider." As they walked back to the boarding house in the deepening twilight, Meredith found herself studying Jacob's profile. He was undeniably handsome in a rugged way, but there was an intensity to him that suggested depths beneath his quiet manner. "You never mention what you do, Mr. Keller," she said. He glanced at her with a half-smile. "A bit of everything. I help out at different ranches when they need an extra hand. Do some hunting and trapping in the mountains when the season's right." "A man without roots," Meredith observed. "For now," he conceded. Then after a pause, "I've been saving to buy land of my own. Just waiting for the right opportunity." Something in his tone made her wonder if there was more to his interest in her situation than simple kindness. The thought troubled her as they reached Mrs. Sullivan's gate. "Mr. Keller," she said, pausing with her hand on the latch. "I'm grateful for your help, truly. But I can't help feeling there's something you're not telling me about Edwin, and perhaps about yourself." The soft light from the boarding house windows illuminated the sudden tension in his jaw. "You're right," he said finally. "There is. But tonight isn't the time. You've had enough to process." "When then?" she pressed. "Sunday," he said. "After church. I'll take you to see Prescott's place. You should see what you might be claiming." As she watched him walk away, Meredith couldn't shake the feeling that Jacob Keller's interest in her went beyond neighborly kindness. What connection had he had to Edwin Prescott? And why was he so invested in her decision about the property? The questions followed her into uneasy dreams, where trains never arrived, and a handsome stranger kept appearing on the horizon, always just out of reach. Sunday morning found Meredith sitting beside Mrs. Sullivan in the small white church that served as Sweetwater's spiritual center. She wore her best dress, a deep green poplin with modest lace trim, and a borrowed bonnet. The familiar rhythms of the service brought unexpected comfort, even as she felt the curious glances of the congregation. Reverend Thompson's sermon focused on new beginnings, with pointed references to strangers being welcomed. Meredith suspected Mrs. Sullivan might have had a word with him. After the final hymn, she found Jacob waiting outside, his usually casual appearance transformed by a clean white shirt and string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious curl still fell across his forehead. "Miss Harrison," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "You look lovely today." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of how his blue eyes matched the clear Montana sky behind him. "Are we still going to see the property?" He nodded, gesturing toward a buggy waiting nearby. "Borrowed it for the occasion. Thought it might be more comfortable than riding double again." The drive took them out of town and along a winding dirt road that followed a creek. Rolling grasslands stretched to distant mountains, dotted with wildflowers and occasional clusters of pine trees. "It's beautiful," Meredith admitted, breathing in the clean air scented with sage and pine. "Different from Boston, I imagine," Jacob said. "In every possible way." She glanced at his profile. Have you always lived here, Mr. Keller? He kept his eyes on the road. Born in Kansas. Came out here with my older brother after the war. He didn't take to the country like I did. Went back east 5 years ago. And your parents? Both gone. Pa in the war, Ma from influenza the winter after. The simple tragedy of it silenced her. So many lives disrupted by the great conflict that had torn the nation apart. There it is, Jacob said after they'd traveled about 4 miles from town. Prescott's place. The homestead came into view as they crested a small rise. A modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a small valley where the creek widened. A stand of cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers bloomed along the creek banks. It was far humbler than the ranch house Edwin had described in his letters, but there was an undeniable charm to the setting. Jacob helped her down from the buggy, and they walked toward the cabin. Banks kept it maintained, hoping to sell it. He explained, producing a key. Prescott owed money all over town, but he managed to keep this parcel free of debt. The interior was simple, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. Rough-hewn furniture and shelves lined the walls. Everything was neat but basic, the home of a man who lived simply. Not what you expected? Jacob asked, watching her take it in. Meredith ran her fingers along a handmade table. No, his letters described something quite different. She turned to face Jacob. You knew him well. Jacob's expression tightened. Well enough to know he wasn't the man he pretended to be in those letters. There it was, the thing unspoken between them since their first meeting. How can you be so certain of what he wrote me? Jacob crossed to a small desk in the corner and opened the drawer. He removed a stack of papers tied with string and handed it to her. Because these are the drafts of his letters to you. He kept them all. With trembling hands, Meredith untied the string. There they were, dozens of pages in Edwin's handwriting, many crossed out and rewritten. Her eyes caught phrases, my substantial holdings, the finest house in the county, servants to attend your needs. He was a dreamer, Jacob said softly, always talking about the empire he was building, the important man he would become. The reality never matched his stories. Meredith sank into a chair, the letters clutched in her lap. Why are you showing me this? Jacob knelt before her, his eyes intense. Because you deserve the truth. Because I found these after he died, and I read them, and I saw how he lied to you. And because, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. Because what? She whispered. Because I'm the one who wrote to tell you to come anyway. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. You? But how? Why? Jacob stood and paced to the window. After the flood, when we found him, I helped the sheriff go through his things. Found the letters, realized he had a fiancée back east who didn't know he was dead. I was going to write and tell you, but then I read more. He turned to face her. I read about you, a teacher with dreams of your own, someone who wanted more than Boston drawing rooms, someone brave enough to journey west for a new life. Meredith felt dizzy with confusion. So you wrote to me, pretending to be Edwin, and told me to come? No. Jacob's denial was vehement. I would never do that. I wrote as myself, explaining what happened. Said that despite Edwin's death, Sweetwater was still a good place that needed a teacher. That you'd be welcome if you still wanted to come. I never received such a letter, she said. Jacob's expression darkened. The stage was robbed 3 months ago. Mail pouch was taken. My letter must have been in it. Meredith stood, needing to move, to process this revelation. So I came all this way because of crossed letters and bad timing. I'm sorry, Jacob said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her believe him. When the stationmaster telegraphed that Edwin's bride had arrived, I couldn't believe it. Knew you must never have gotten my letter. So you came for me, she said softly. A stranger in a wedding dress. He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. Couldn't let you sit there waiting for a man who wasn't coming. The pieces were falling into place now, his knowledge of her background, his interest in the property, his careful attention to her welfare. There's more, isn't there? She asked. Something about this place. Jacob hesitated, then nodded toward the window. Come see. Outside. He led her up a small hill beyond the cabin. From the top, they could see the entire valley, the creek winding through green meadows, the distant mountains, the cabin nestled below. This land, he said, his voice taking on a passionate quality she hadn't heard before, isn't just any 80 acres. It's the headwaters of Cottonwood Creek. Whoever owns this controls water rights for 3 miles downstream. That's why Prescott kept it debt-free while borrowing against everything else. It's valuable, Meredith realized. More than you know. The Morrison Ranch downstream has been trying to buy it for years. They're offering 5 times what it's worth. Meredith turned to look at him, sudden understanding dawning. And you want it too. For the first time since she'd met him, Jacob looked uncertain. I've been saving for land of my own. This piece, it's perfect. Good water, sheltered from winter storms, enough grazing for a small herd to start. So when you encouraged me to claim it, I had my own interests, he admitted. But that doesn't make what I said any less true. You deserve something after coming all this way on false promises. Meredith walked a few paces away, needing space to think. The man had manipulated her, guided her decisions while withholding crucial information. Yet she couldn't deny the genuine care he'd shown, the respectful way he'd treated her when she was at her most vulnerable. What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Keller? She asked, turning to face him. He took a deep breath. A partnership. Of all the answers she'd expected, this wasn't one of them. Excuse me. You have claim to this land, but no knowledge of ranching. I have the knowledge, but not the capital or legal claim. He stepped closer, his eyes earnest. Together, we could make something of this place. A real home, a profitable ranch. As business partners, she clarified, heart suddenly racing. Jacob's gaze didn't waver. To start with, the rest would be up to you. In time. The implication hung in the air between them. This virtual stranger was proposing not just a business arrangement, but the possibility of something more personal. This is absurd, Meredith said, though her voice lacked conviction. I don't know you, Mr. Keller. No, he agreed. But I think you know enough to judge if I'm a man of my word. Unlike Prescott, I won't paint false pictures or make promises I can't keep. The directness of his gaze was unnerving. In the weeks since she'd arrived in Sweetwater, Jacob Keller had shown himself to be kind, resourceful, and honest, except for this one significant omission about his interest in the property. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. He nodded, stepping back. The teaching position is yours regardless. This, he gestured to the land around them, is a separate matter entirely. As they drove back toward town in silence, Meredith found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. Could she make a life here, so far from everything familiar? The teaching position offered security and purpose. But Jacob's proposal offered something more, a stake in this wild, beautiful country, and perhaps eventually, a different kind of partnership altogether. The question was whether she could trust him, or whether she was simply replacing one set of false promises with another. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple white building with a bell tower and a small attached residence. Over the next week, Meredith threw herself into preparing both for the upcoming term. The townspeople proved as good as their word. Furniture appeared for the residents. The carpenter repaired loose boards and broken windows, and mothers brought curtains and quilts. Jacob Keller kept a respectful distance, though she often felt his eyes on her when they crossed paths in town. He seemed determined to give her the space she'd requested, even as the deadline for her decision about the property loomed. The bank would only hold it another week before entertaining other offers. 5 days before school was to begin, Meredith was arranging books on the classroom shelves when a shadow fell across the doorway. Miss Harrison? A woman's voice, unfamiliar and tight, with controlled emotion. Meredith turned to see an elegantly dressed woman of about 40 standing in the doorway. Something in her bearing spoke of wealth and position. Her tailored traveling suit was of the finest quality, and her hat featured an ostrich feather that must have cost a small fortune. Yes, Meredith replied, brushing dust from her hands. May I help you? The woman entered, surveying the modest classroom with barely disguised distaste. I am Margaret Morrison. My husband owns the largest cattle operation in the county. The name connected immediately to what Jacob had told her. The Morrisons wanted Prescott's land, her land, potentially. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Morrison. I'm afraid the school isn't quite ready for visitors yet. I'm not here about the school, Margaret Morrison said dismissively. I'm here about Edwin Prescott's property. I understand you're considering a claim to it. Meredith straightened, sensing the confrontation beneath the woman's polite veneer. News travels quickly in Sweetwater. It's a small town, Mrs. Morrison agreed. Which is why I thought I should warn you before you make a grave mistake. What mistake would that be? The older woman moved further into the room, her expensive perfume incongruous in the simple schoolhouse. Aligning yourself with Jacob Keller. I understand he's been advising you. A defensive heat rose in Meredith's chest. Mr. Keller has been kind enough to explain some aspects of property law to me. I fail to see how that concerns you. Mrs. Morrison's smile didn't reach her eyes. It concerns me because Keller has been trying to interfere with my husband's business for years. That piece of land controls water access to our southern pastures. We've made generous offers for it repeatedly. Perhaps Mr. Prescott didn't wish to sell, Meredith suggested. Prescott was a fool and a dreamer, Mrs. Morrison snapped, then quickly composed herself. Forgive me. I shouldn't speak ill of the dead. My point is that Jacob Keller has his own agenda. He's using you to gain access to that property. The accusation struck uncomfortably close to Meredith's own doubts. Mr. Keller has been forthright about his interest in the land. Has he? Mrs. Morrison raised an elegant eyebrow. Has he told you about his history with the Prescott family? About why he's so determined to control that particular piece of land? A cold uncertainty settled in Meredith's stomach. What are you implying? The older woman moved to the window, looking out toward the distant mountains. Ask him about Sarah Prescott. Ask him why he disappeared from Sweetwater for 2 years after she died. Ask him why Edwin hated him enough to refuse to sell him a single acre, even when he was desperate for money. Meredith felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her. Sarah Prescott? Edwin's sister. Mrs. Morrison turned back, her expression now almost pitying. You really don't know anything, do you? Jacob Keller courted Sarah Prescott 5 years ago. When she died in a riding accident, he vanished. When he returned, he and Edwin could barely stand to be in the same room. There's bad blood there, Miss Harrison. Whatever Keller has told you about his interest in that land, I guarantee there's more to the story. The revelation left Meredith speechless. Jacob had never mentioned a connection to Edwin beyond being neighbors. Mrs. Morrison moved toward the door, apparently satisfied with the impact of her words. My husband is prepared to offer you $500 for clear title to the property. That's more than a year's salary for a teacher in these parts. Enough to return east, if you wished, or to establish yourself properly here. She placed a calling card on a nearby desk. Think about it. We'll expect your answer by Friday. After she left, Meredith sank into her chair, mind reeling. $500 was indeed a small fortune. With such a sum, she could furnish the school properly, buy new books, perhaps even start a small savings account. She wouldn't need Jacob Keller or his proposal of partnership. But the revelation about Sarah Prescott troubled her more than the money tempted her. Why had Jacob concealed such a significant connection? What other secrets lay beneath his forthright manner and steady gaze? That evening, she walked to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Sweetwater. It didn't take long to find the grave she sought, a simple marker reading Sarah Elizabeth Prescott, 1858 to 1880, beloved daughter and sister. She had died at 22. The same age Meredith was now. Had she loved Jacob Keller? Had he loved her? And what did her death have to do with the land that now lay at the center of so much attention? As Meredith stood lost in thought, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. I should have told you about her. She turned to find Jacob standing a few paces away, his hat in his hands. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. Yes, you should have, Meredith agreed quietly. How did you find out? He asked. Mrs. Morrison paid me a visit today. She was quite informative about things you neglected to mention. Jacob's expression hardened. I'm sure she was. The Morrisons have wanted that land for years. She mentioned that. She also mentioned that you courted Sarah Prescott, that she died in an accident, and that afterward, you and Edwin were enemies. Meredith stepped closer, searching his face. Is it true? For a long moment, he was silent, eyes fixed on Sarah's grave. Then he nodded. Some of it. Sarah and I were engaged to be married. The accident, it happened on my property. She was thrown from her horse crossing a stream. By the time I found her, his voice trailed off, the old pain evident in his expression. Edwin blamed you, Meredith guessed. He did. Said I should have been with her, should have known that part of the stream was dangerous after the spring rains. Jacob's hands tightened on his hat. Maybe he was right. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. And you left Sweetwater? He nodded. Couldn't bear to stay, seeing his hatred every day, being reminded. I went north, worked cattle drives in Montana Territory for 2 years. But you came back, Meredith said softly. This is my home. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. Sarah loved that land by the creek. We were going to build our house there, start our lives together. After she died, Edwin inherited it. He knew what it meant to me, knew I wanted to honor her memory by making something of it. That's why he refused to sell it to me, even when he needed money badly. The pieces were falling into place now. Jacob's interest in the property, his concern when he learned Edwin's bride had arrived, his proposal of partnership. So when you found out about me, Meredith said slowly, you saw an opportunity to finally get the land. Pain flashed across his face. It wasn't like that. When I read those letters, saw how he'd lied to you, it made me angry. You deserved better than his false promises. But you did want the land, she persisted. Yes, he admitted. I won't deny it. But everything I told you about its value is true. And my offer of partnership was genuine. Meredith turned away, emotions conflicted. Mrs. Morrison offered me $500 for the property. She heard his sharp intake of breath. That's a lot of money. Yes, enough to change my circumstances considerably. Will you take it? His voice was carefully neutral. Meredith faced him again. I don't know. Should I? Jacob shoved his hands into his pockets, his expression troubled. That's not for me to say. The Morrisons can afford it. Their offer is fair, maybe even generous. But you want me to partner with you instead. I do. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. But I won't pretend my motives are entirely selfless. That land means something to me beyond its monetary value. I thought maybe we could build something there together. Something that would honor Sarah's memory while creating a new future. The raw honesty in his voice touched something in Meredith. For all his omissions, there was an integrity to Jacob Keller that she couldn't deny. He'd admitted his self-interest while also demonstrating genuine concern for her welfare from the moment they'd met. I need more time, she said finally. Jacob nodded, replacing his hat. The bank needs an answer by Friday. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. As he walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset, Meredith realized she was standing at a crossroads. The safe path was to take the Morrisons' money, secure her position as Sweetwater's teacher, and build a respectable, independent life. The other path, Jacob's path, offered greater risk, but also the possibility of something she hadn't dared consider since Edwin's deception. A true partnership based on mutual respect and shared dreams. The question was whether she could trust Jacob Keller's vision of their future, or whether she was simply trading one man's false promises for another's. Friday dawned clear and cool, a hint of autumn in the air despite the August date. Meredith had spent a restless night weighing her options, making lists of pros and cons, and finally falling into an exhausted sleep without reaching a decision. The school term would begin on Monday. Her classroom was prepared, textbooks distributed on each desk, her small apartment furnished with the town's generous donations. She had achieved what she'd come west for, a position of respect, independence, the chance to shape young minds in a growing community. Yet as she walked toward the bank that morning, Meredith found herself thinking not of security, but of possibility. The property by the creek, with its cottonwood trees and mountain views, had worked its way into her imagination. She could see why Sarah Prescott had loved it, why Jacob dreamed of building there. Charles Harrington, the bank manager, greeted her with professional courtesy. Miss Harrison, we've been expecting you. I have the papers drawn up for the property transfer, awaiting only your decision on the buyer. Has Mr. Morrison submitted a formal offer? She asked. Indeed. Harrington produced a document. $500 for clear title to the Prescott homestead and water rights. A very generous offer, if I may say so. And Mr. Keller? She inquired, maintaining a neutral tone. The banker's expression shifted subtly. Jacob has expressed interest, yes. He can offer $200 plus a labor agreement for improvements to the property. Harrington leaned forward, lowering his voice. Between us, Miss Harrison, the Morrisons' offer is clearly superior. Jacob is a fine young man, but he lacks the resources of an established ranching operation. I see, Meredith said, taking both documents. May I have a moment to review these? Of course. Harrington gestured to a private office. Take all the time you need. Alone with the papers, Meredith studied both offers carefully. The Morrisons' was straightforward, a cash purchase with no conditions. Jacob's was more complex. A smaller cash payment coupled with a detailed proposal for developing the property, including specific improvements he would make over the next year and provisions for how profits would be shared. What caught her attention, however, was a clause near the end of Jacob's proposal. In the event that Miss Harrison wishes to dissolve the partnership at any time, she retains ownership of the original homestead building and 5 acres surrounding it, with access rights to the creek. It was a safety net, an acknowledgement that their arrangement might not work out, and a guarantee that she wouldn't be left with nothing if it didn't. The gesture spoke volumes about his character. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Harrington poked his head in. "Pardon me, Miss Harrison, but both interested parties have arrived. Mr. Morrison is in my office, and Mr. Keller is waiting in the lobby. Would you like to speak with either of them before making your decision?" Meredith hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I believe I would. Mr. Keller first, please." A moment later, Jacob entered, hat in hand. His expression was guarded, but his eyes betrayed his tension. "Miss Harrison," he greeted her formally. "Have you reached a decision?" "Almost," she replied, indicating the chair across from her. "I have a question first." He sat, placing his hat on his knee. "I'll answer honestly. This clause about me keeping the homestead if our partnership fails. Why include it?" Jacob met her gaze directly. "Because I want you to choose partnership with me for the right reasons, not because you feel trapped by circumstances. You came west for independence. I won't be the man who takes that from you, even though it means you might lose the land you've wanted for so long." Even then, his voice was steady. "I've learned that some things matter more than getting exactly what you want." Meredith studied him, seeing beyond the handsome face to the character beneath. In the weeks since she'd learned about Sarah, Jacob had kept his distance, respecting her need to decide without pressure. It spoke to a patience and integrity that impressed her. "Thank you, Mr. Keller. That will be all for now." After he left, Richard Morrison entered with his wife. He was an imposing man with a silver-streaked beard and the confident bearing of wealth and influence. "Miss Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "A pleasure to finally meet the young lady who's caused such a stir in our little community." "Mr. Morrison," she acknowledged, shaking his hand briefly. "Your wife spoke highly of your interest in the property." "Indeed." He smiled expansively. "My offer stands. $500 for clear title, a tidy sum for a schoolteacher, and fair compensation for land you never expected to own." "Very generous," Meredith agreed. "May I ask what your plans are for the property?" Morrison waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing that would concern you. Water access for our southern herds, primarily, and the homestead itself. We'd likely remove it. The structure has little value, and the location would make a good line camp for our cowboys during spring roundup." Margaret Morrison leaned forward. "Miss Harrison, as I mentioned, this sum would allow you considerable freedom. You could return east if Sweetwater proves unsuitable." There was something in her tone, a subtle condescension, an assumption that Meredith wouldn't adapt to frontier life, that struck a nerve. "I have no intention of returning east, Mrs. Morrison. I've found Sweetwater quite welcoming." "For now," Margaret said with a thin smile. "But a young woman of your background might eventually find the limitations of our little town rather confining. Best to keep options open." Richard Morrison frowned at his wife, then turned back to Meredith. "My offer expires today, Miss Harrison. I trust you'll make the sensible decision." After they left, Meredith sat quietly, reflecting on both conversations. The Morrisons offered security and a clean break, money in the bank and no entanglements. Jacob offered partnership, respect for her independence, and the chance to build something meaningful. The choice, when viewed that way, was surprisingly clear. When she emerged from the office, both parties were waiting in the bank lobby, carefully avoiding each other's eyes. The tension between them was palpable. "I've made my decision," Meredith announced, addressing Harrington but aware of all eyes upon her. "I'm accepting Mr. Keller's proposal of partnership." Jacob's face lit with surprised joy, while Morrison's darkened with anger. "You're making a mistake, young lady," he said sharply. "That land is worth far more than Keller can pay." "Perhaps," Meredith agreed calmly. "But I'm not selling it. I'm investing it in a partnership that respects my contribution and guarantees my independence." Margaret Morrison's lips thinned to a disapproving line. "You'll regret this decision when winter comes and you're struggling to survive out there." "I don't believe I will," Meredith replied. But even if difficulties arise, I'd rather face them with a true partner than avoid them with money that comes with unspoken conditions. As the Morrisons stormed out, Meredith turned to Jacob, whose expression had shifted from joy to concern. You've made an enemy today, he said quietly. The Morrisons aren't used to being refused. Then it's fortunate I'll have a capable partner to help me navigate those waters, she replied, offering him the signed agreement. His fingers brushed hers as he took the document, sending an unexpected warmth through her. Partners, then, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I promise you won't regret it. See that I don't, Mr. Keller, she responded, but her smile softened the words. The first month of school passed in a blur of activity. Meredith's 27 students ranged from 6 to 16 years old, with widely varying levels of previous education. Some could barely read, while others showed surprising aptitude for mathematics and science. Every weekend, Jacob drove her out to the property where work was progressing rapidly. True to his word, he had begun repairs on the cabin, adding a larger window to let in more light, reinforcing the roof, and building proper cabinets in the kitchen. Their partnership remained strictly professional, though Meredith couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed her movements, or how his hands sometimes lingered when helping her into the buggy. For her part, she found herself looking forward to their Saturday excursions, enjoying his company and the easy conversation that flowed between them. As October arrived with crisp mornings and golden aspen leaves, Jacob announced that the cabin was finally ready for her inspection. You could move in now if you wanted, he said as they approached the property, though you might want to wait until school breaks for Christmas. Meredith's eyes widened at the transformation. Flower boxes now graced the windows, filled with late-blooming asters. A covered porch had been added to the front, with a swing suspended from sturdy chains. Smoke rose cheerfully from the stone chimney, suggesting a welcoming fire within. Jacob, she breathed, using his first name without thinking. It's wonderful. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Wait until you see inside. The interior had been transformed as well. The rough-hewn furniture was polished to a warm glow, the floors covered with colorful rag rugs. Shelves lined one wall, half filled with books. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, and the kitchen now boasted a proper cast-iron stove. How did you do all this in just a month? She asked, moving through the rooms in wonder. Jacob shrugged, though his proud smile betrayed his satisfaction. Had some help from friends. Folks in Sweetwater want to see this work out. It's perfect, she said, touching the spines of the books. You even remembered my love of reading. Found most of those at the mercantile. Owner's wife had a box of novels she'd finished and was happy to part with them. Meredith turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone in what felt very much like a home. Their home, potentially. The thought sent a flutter of nervous excitement through her. There's something else, Jacob said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Found this in a drawer while cleaning out the desk. Think it was meant for you. Unwrapping the cloth, Meredith found a simple gold ring with a small pearl. Edwin's ring for me, she murmured. Yes. Figured you should have it, whatever you decide to do with it. Meredith studied the ring, feeling strangely detached from it and all it represented. The false promises, the journey based on lies, the future that had never been real. Carefully, she wrapped it back in the cloth and placed it in her pocket. Thank you for giving it to me, she said. But I think its time has passed. Jacob watched her closely, something unspoken in his eyes. Does that mean you're considering a future here? With our partnership? I am, she admitted. The school runs smoothly now. I could manage both responsibilities with proper planning. Hope brightened his expression. We could plant the south field in the spring, maybe add a few head of cattle by summer. In a year or two, we might even. A sharp crack interrupted him, followed by the distinctive whine of a bullet passing nearby. Jacob reacted instantly, pulling Meredith down and away from the window. What was that? She gasped. Rifle shot, he said grimly, moving in a crouch toward the door. Stay down. Another shot splintered the wood of the porch railing as Jacob cautiously peered out. Someone's up on the ridge, he muttered. Can't see who. Fear clutched at Meredith's chest. Why would anyone shoot at us? Jacob's expression was grim. Can think of a few reasons. None of them good. He moved back to her side. We need to get to the horses and back to town. When I give the word, we'll run for the barn. Stay low and don't stop for anything. The next moments passed in a blur of terror as they dashed across the open yard, bullets kicking up dirt around them. They reached the barn safely, though Meredith's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Jacob hitched the horses to the buggy with impressive speed, all while keeping a wary eye on the ridge where the shooter lurked. "Get in," he directed, helping her up. "Keep your head down." The ride back to town was tense, both of them watching for any sign of pursuit. Only when the buildings of Sweetwater came into view did Jacob relax slightly. "What happens now?" Meredith asked, straightening her disheveled hair. "We talked to the sheriff," Jacob replied, his jaw tight with anger. "Someone just tried to kill us on our own property. I aim to find out who." Sheriff Walker listened to their account with growing concern, his weathered face grave beneath his silver mustache. "You say the shots came from the North Ridge?" he asked, making notes. Jacob nodded. "Whoever it was had a clear view of the cabin. They waited until we were both inside, then started shooting. Any idea who might want to harm either of you?" Jacob and Meredith exchanged glances. "The Morrisons were angry about losing the property," Meredith said hesitantly. "But surely they wouldn't resort to violence." The sheriff's expression remained neutral. "The Morrisons have considerable influence in this county, Miss Harrison. Not saying they're behind this, but I'll look into it. In the meantime, I'd advise you both to stay in town." As they left the sheriff's office, Jacob escorted Meredith back to her quarters at the schoolhouse, his manner protective. "I don't like this," he said, checking the locks on her windows. "If someone's willing to take shots at us in broad daylight, there's no telling what they might try next." "You don't really think the Morrisons would try to harm us, do you?" Meredith asked. Jacob's expression was troubled. "Richard Morrison built his ranch by pushing out smaller operators. Some left willingly, others required more persuasion. Nothing was ever proven, but there were incidents: barn fires, cattle disappearing, water sources mysteriously drying up." Fear coiled in Meredith's stomach. "What do we do?" "We be careful," he said firmly. "Don't go anywhere alone. Keep your doors locked. And maybe," he hesitated, then plunged ahead, "maybe we should reconsider our timeline. If we were living at the property together, it would be safer for both of us." The implication hung in the air between them. Living together, unmarried, would scandalize the town and potentially cost Meredith her position as teacher. "I can't," she said softly. "Not like that. The school board would never allow it." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I know. I don't want anything to happen to you, Meredith." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it, coupled with the genuine concern in his voice, sent a warmth through her despite the circumstances. "We'll figure this out," she assured him. "The sheriff will investigate, and whoever is responsible will be caught." But as Jacob reluctantly left her alone in the small schoolhouse apartment, Meredith couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. November brought the first snows and a series of disturbing incidents. A small fire was discovered in the barn at the homestead, clearly deliberate but caught before it could spread. Then Jacob's horse was found with a cut on its leg that appeared to have been made by a knife rather than accident. Each time, Sheriff Walker investigated but found no conclusive evidence. The Morrisons, meanwhile, maintained a cool distance, neither threatening nor conciliatory. Through it all, Meredith continued teaching, and Jacob continued working on the property, though now he carried a rifle and kept a watchful eye on the surrounding hills. Their partnership deepened through the shared adversity. Jacob joined Meredith for supper twice a week, helping her plan lessons and discussing books they'd both read. She found herself looking forward to these evenings, enjoying his dry humor and insightful observations. The attraction between them grew, though neither acknowledged it directly. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside the schoolhouse windows, Jacob arrived for their usual supper looking unusually serious. "What's wrong?" Meredith asked as she took his coat. He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Got this today? Think you should read it." Inside was a brief note in an elegant hand. "Reconsider our offer. $750 for the property, no questions asked about recent unpleasantness. This opportunity expires at year's end. RM. They're admitting responsibility," Meredith said, shocked. "Not explicitly," Jacob pointed out, "but the implication is clear enough. They're responsible for the unpleasantness, and it will continue unless we sell." Meredith sank into a chair, the letter clutched in her hand. "What do we do?" We can't prove they're behind the incidents, and the sheriff seems reluctant to pursue them without evidence. Jacob knelt before her, taking her hands in his. There is another option, he said quietly. We could sell. What? She stared at him in disbelief. After everything we've done, everything we've planned? I hate the idea, he admitted. But I hate the thought of you in danger more. $750 would give us both a fresh start. Maybe somewhere the Morrisons don't have such influence. Meredith pulled her hands away, rising to pace the small room. I won't be bullied into selling land that's rightfully ours. Not after I've found a home here, work I love, a community that respects me, a partnership you value. Jacob asked softly. She turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his steady gaze. Yes, that most of all. Something shifted in his expression, a decision made. Then we fight. But we need to be smarter about it. Over supper, they formulated a plan. Jacob would let it be known around town that he was reconsidering the Morrisons' offer, suggesting the incidents had worn down his resolve. Meanwhile, Meredith would speak privately with several influential townspeople who had no love for the Morrisons, including Reverend Thompson and Mrs. Sullivan. We'll draw them out, Jacob explained. Make them think we're about to cave, then catch them in the act if they try one more intimidation tactic. The risk was significant, but neither could see another path forward. As they finished their planning, the snow outside intensified, the wind driving it against the windows in swirling patterns. You shouldn't try to ride back to town in this, Meredith said, concerned. Jacob had been staying in a room above the livery stable since the incidents began, giving up his rented cabin to remain closer to Sweetwater. I'll be fine, he assured her, though he looked at the worsening storm with evident concern. It's foolish to risk it, she insisted. You can sleep on the settee. I have extra blankets. Jacob hesitated, visibly torn between propriety and practicality. People will talk. People already talk, she replied with a small smile. We're business partners who spend a great deal of time together. Besides, in weather like this, no one would expect you to leave. Later, with Jacob settled on the narrow settee and Meredith in her bedroom, the storm howling around the small schoolhouse, she found herself strangely at peace despite the dangers they faced. There was something profoundly comforting about having him near, about facing their troubles together rather than alone. It was then, listening to the quiet sounds of his breathing in the next room, that Meredith admitted to herself what she had been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with Jacob Keller. Not with romantic illusions or false promises, but with the real man who had shown her nothing but respect and steadfast support since the day she arrived in Sweetwater. The realization should have frightened her after Edwin's deception. Instead, it filled her with a quiet certainty. Whatever happened with the property, with the Morrisons, with her teaching position, this feeling was real and worth fighting for. Morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape, every branch and rooftop dressed in sparkling white. Jacob left early to avoid gossip, promising to begin implementing their plan immediately. Over the next week, they played their roles perfectly. Jacob made a show of consulting with the bank manager about the Morrisons' offer, while Meredith confided concerns to selected townspeople. Word spread quickly, and by the weekend, it was common knowledge that the partners were wavering under pressure. The trap was set. Now they needed only to wait and see if the Morrisons would take the bait. Christmas Eve arrived with festive preparations throughout Sweetwater. The schoolhouse hosted a pageant featuring Meredith's students, followed by a community gathering with food and gifts. Despite the holiday spirit, both Meredith and Jacob remained vigilant, watching for any sign that their plan was working. As the celebration wound down, Sheriff Walker approached them, his expression unusually serious. Might have some information for you, too, he said quietly. One of the Morrison hands was overheard in the saloon last night, bragging about how they were going to finish the job at your place tonight. Said the boss wanted it done while everyone was distracted by Christmas. Jacob's expression hardened. You believe him? Wouldn't have come to you otherwise, the sheriff replied. This cowboy, Pete Simmons, he's been Morrison's muscle for years. If he's planning something, it's because Morrison ordered it. What are you going to do about it? Meredith asked. Walker looked uncomfortable. That's the thing. Simmons didn't exactly spell out what they're planning. Could just be drunk talk. I can't arrest a man for running his mouth in a saloon. So you're doing nothing, Jacob said flatly. I didn't say that. The sheriff's voice lowered further. I'll be keeping an eye on things tonight. Might be in the vicinity of your property. If something happens and I witness it." He let the implication hang. Jacob nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you, Sheriff." After Walker moved away, Jacob turned to Meredith, his expression grim but determined. "This could be our chance to end this." "What are you thinking?" she asked, noting the resolve in his eyes. "I'm going out to the property tonight. If they're planning something, I'll be ready. With the sheriff nearby, we might finally catch them in the act." Alarm flashed through Meredith. "It's too dangerous. What if they're armed?" "I'll be careful," he promised. "But this may be our only opportunity to prove the Morrisons are behind everything." She knew he was right, yet fear clutched at her heart. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Jacob said firmly. "If there's trouble, then I should be there," she interrupted. "This is our property, our future. I won't sit safely in town while you face danger alone." They argued in hushed voices, but in the end, Jacob recognized the determination in her eyes. By early evening, they were riding toward the homestead, bundled against the cold, the winter moon providing ample light across the snow-covered landscape. The cabin stood silent and dark when they arrived. Jacob insisted they approach cautiously, tethering their horses in a sheltered grove some distance away and proceeding on foot. "We'll wait in the barn," he whispered as they moved through the shadows. Better vantage point to see anyone approaching the cabin. The barn was cold but offered protection from the wind. Jacob positioned them in the hayloft, where they could observe both the cabin and the surrounding property through a small window. Hours passed in tense silence, the temperature dropping steadily. Meredith huddled close to Jacob for warmth, his arm around her shoulders a comfort against both the cold and her growing anxiety. "Maybe the sheriff was wrong," she whispered as midnight approached. "Maybe it was just saloon talk." Jacob shook his head. "They'll come. Morrison wants this finished before Christmas Day." As if summoned by his certainty, the sound of approaching horses broke the stillness. 3 riders materialized from the darkness, moving cautiously toward the cabin. "That's Pete Simmons in front," Jacob murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't recognize the others." They watched as the men dismounted, one carrying what appeared to be a large bundle. With growing horror, Meredith realized it was a can of kerosene. "They're going to burn the cabin," she gasped. "And make it look like an accident," Jacob agreed grimly. Christmas Eve, no one around, a stray spark from the fireplace. Who could prove otherwise? He reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Stay here. I'm going to circle around behind them." "Jacob, wait." Meredith caught his arm, sudden fear making her voice sharp. "Where's the sheriff? He said he'd be watching." "Can't wait for him," Jacob replied. "Once they start that fire, we lose everything." Before she could protest further, he was moving silently down the ladder and out the barn door. Meredith watched anxiously as his dark figure slipped from shadow to shadow, approaching the cabin from the opposite side of the intruders. At the cabin, the 3 men were now splashing kerosene along the porch and walls, their voices carrying faintly on the still night air. "Make sure you get the back too," Simmons directed. "Boss wants nothing left standing." "What about Keller's warning?" one of the others asked. "Thought we were just scaring them off." Simmons laughed, a harsh sound in the peaceful night. "Boss is tired of waiting. Fire's cleaner anyway. By the time anyone from town notices, it'll be too late." The casual cruelty in his voice chilled Meredith more than the winter air. These men were prepared to destroy not just property, but dreams, possibilities, futures, all for their employer's greed. She scanned the darkness anxiously, seeking any sign of Jacob or the sheriff. When she spotted movement near the cabin's corner, her heart leapt, until she realized it was too large to be Jacob. One of Simmons' men was working his way around the building, directly toward where Jacob would be approaching. Without conscious thought, Meredith was moving, scrambling down the ladder and running through the snow, her only thought to warn Jacob before it was too late. "Stop!" she shouted as she emerged from the barn. "Stop right now." All 3 men whirled toward her, momentarily frozen in surprise at the sight of a woman appearing from nowhere. Well, Simmons recovered first, a slow smile spreading across his face. "What have we here?" The schoolteacher decided to pay a Christmas Eve visit to her property. "The sheriff knows you're here," Meredith said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's watching right now." Simmons glanced around theatrically. "Don't see any sheriff, ma'am. Just you." All alone where you shouldn't be. He nodded to one of his companions. Grab her. Can't have witnesses. The man started toward Meredith, but before he could reach her, the sharp crack of a rifle shot split the night. The man cried out, clutching his arm as he fell to his knees. Next one won't be a warning. Jacob's voice rang out as he emerged from the shadows, rifle aimed steadily. Drop your weapons, all of you. Simmons tensed, his hand moving toward his holster, but froze as another voice joined the confrontation. I wouldn't, Sheriff Walker advised, stepping into view with his shotgun leveled. Mr. Keller's a fine shot, but I'm even better. And I've just witnessed attempted arson, which is a hanging offense in this territory. What followed was a blur of activity. The men disarmed and bound, a wagon summoned to transport them to the jail in town, statements taken by the sheriff as they stood shivering in the cold night air. Morrison will deny everything. Simmons spat as he was led away. Our word against yours. Maybe, the sheriff agreed. But 3 men caught in the act is pretty convincing evidence. And I suspect your loyalty might waver when faced with prison or worse. When the sheriff finally departed with his prisoners, Meredith and Jacob were left alone in the silent night, the cabin still standing, their future still possible. You shouldn't have left the barn, Jacob said, his voice tight with residual fear. He could have shot you. I saw his man heading toward you, she replied simply. I couldn't let that happen. Jacob stared at her, emotions warring in his expression, anger, fear, and something deeper that made her breath catch. When I saw you out there, facing them. He shook his head, words failing him. Then, in 3 quick strides, he crossed to her, pulling her into his arms with sudden urgency. The kiss was both unexpected and inevitable, the culmination of months of growing feelings, of partnership tested by adversity, of mutual respect deepened by shared purpose. His lips were warm despite the cold night, his arms strong around her, and Meredith found herself responding with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day I found you waiting at the train station, he confessed. But I needed you to be sure, to know me for who I really am, not just the man who came to your rescue. I do know you, she whispered, her gloved hands framing his face. Better than I've ever known anyone. That's why I love you, Jacob Keller. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. And I love you, Meredith Harrison. Enough to wait until you were ready to hear it. Above them, the stars shone brilliant in the clear winter sky, and from the distant town church, bells began to ring, announcing the arrival of Christmas Day. We should get back to town, Jacob said reluctantly. It's too cold to stay here without a fire. Meredith glanced at the cabin, still standing despite all attempts to destroy it. Soon it will be warm again. Soon it will be home. Our home, Jacob agreed, taking her hand. If that's what you want. She smiled up at him, certainty filling her heart. It's exactly what I want. But perhaps we should do things properly. Properly, he echoed, a teasing light in his eyes. You mean a long courtship, parental permission, formal engagement? Well, my mother is thousands of miles away, and we've faced arsonists together, which seems more binding than a formal courtship. Meredith laughed softly. But yes, I think the town would appreciate if we observed certain proprieties before I move out here permanently. Jacob's expression grew serious. Meredith Harrison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need rescuing or protection, but because we're better together than apart. Yes, she replied simply. Because you never once asked me to be less than who I am, only offered to help me become more. Their second kiss was sealed with that promise, beneath the vast Montana sky, where stars blazed like hope against the darkness. Spring 1886 dawned with renewal across the Montana Territory. The hills greened, wildflowers carpeted the valleys, and Cottonwood Creek ran full and clear through the property that had become known as the Keller homestead. In the months since Christmas Eve, much had changed in Sweetwater. Pete Simmons had indeed turned on his employer, confessing that Richard Morrison had ordered not just intimidation but elimination of the problem at the Keller property. Morrison now awaited trial in the territorial capital, his wife having fled back east to escape the scandal. Jacob and Meredith had married on Valentine's Day in the Sweetwater Church, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Sullivan had cried. The sheriff had stood as Jacob's best man, and Meredith's students had sung a specially prepared song for their beloved teacher. Now, as April's sunshine warmed the land, Meredith stood on the porch of the cabin, expanded over the winter to include a proper bedroom and study, watching Jacob work with a small herd of cattle in the newly fenced south pasture. She still taught at the school, writing in 3 days a week while a former student handled the other days. The arrangement allowed her to balance her passion for teaching with her new life as Jacob's wife and partner in their growing ranch. In her hand, she held a letter that had arrived that morning, a response to one she'd sent months ago. Jacob noticed her watching and rode over, dismounting with the easy grace that still made her heart skip. After a quick kiss, he nodded to the paper in her hand. News from Boston? Meredith nodded. From my mother. She's finally forgiven me for not returning after Edwin's death. Says she might even visit this summer if her health permits. Jacob grinned, wiping sweat from his brow. Should I be worried? Terrified, she teased, then grew serious. She'll love you once she knows you. How could she not? His arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. As long as she approves of me keeping her daughter in this uncivilized wilderness. This isn't wilderness, Meredith protested, gesturing to the neat cabin, the flowering garden bed she'd planted, the young orchard beginning to leaf out. This is home. Jacob's expression softened as he surveyed all they'd built together in the months since she'd first arrived as a deserted bride waiting by the railroad tracks. Home, he agreed. Everything I dreamed of building here, and more than I ever dared hope for. Meredith rested her head against his shoulder, contentment filling her heart. Sarah would be happy, I think, knowing that this place is loved, that it's becoming everything she might have wished for it. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. She would. She always said this land had a spirit to it, something special that needed the right people to bring it to life. A soft breeze stirred the cottonwood leaves, their gentle rustling like whispered approval. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark trilled its spring song. I have something to tell you, Meredith said softly. Something that will make this home even more complete. Jacob looked down at her, curiosity in his eyes. She took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. By Christmas, there will be 3 of us here. His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. A baby? You're sure? Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday, she said, laughing as Jacob lifted her in a gentle embrace, spinning her around with exuberant delight. Careful, she protested, though his strong arms held her securely. I'm in a delicate condition, remember? He set her down immediately, his face comically serious. Right. No spinning. What else? Should you be teaching? Riding to town? I can build a proper carriage, something with good springs. Meredith silenced him with a kiss. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Women have babies on the frontier every day. I'll be fine, we'll be fine. Jacob gathered her close again, more gently this time, his hand protective over her stomach. A family, he murmured against her hair. Our family. As they stood together on the porch of the home they'd fought for and won, Meredith reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. A journey begun in loss and deception had led to the truest, most honest love she could have imagined. The deserted bride who had waited those 3 long days by the railroad tracks had found not the future she'd expected, but one infinitely more genuine and satisfying. A partnership of equals, built on respect and shared dreams, strengthened by facing adversity together. Jacob's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as they had that first day when a stranger rode up, claiming her heart. I love you, Mrs. Keller, he said softly. And I love you, Mr. Keller, she replied. Today and all our tomorrows. Above them, the vast Montana sky stretched endless and blue, full of promise for the future they would build together.